So we're going to give it just a couple of seconds. Again, like I was saying earlier, it's connecting from Restream to different locations. I'll get a notification when it gets there. And it looks like we are now live. Welcome everyone back to season 5, episode 3 of the Level Up Your Wealth podcast, where we talk about the gaming industry from a business perspective. One of your hosts, Marcus Howard. Mario unfortunately couldn't be here this week, but we have an excellent show for you today. I'm excited to introduce you to Vincent. Welcome to the show, Vincent.
How are you, Howard?
I'm good. I'm good. Live long and prosper. That's old school. That's old school.
Absolutely.
Which is ironically the topic of this episode. You've worked in the gaming industry close to 3 decades. Is that correct?
Since 1990, I got into games. I've been in the entertainment software business since 1990. I got into games in 1997, I think.
Okay. So before we do that, I want to just give everybody a shout out. Thank you for joining us live. If you have any questions, let us know. If you have any for Vincent, he has a wealth of experience in the industry. We're going to tackle a bunch of important topics, including ageism in the gaming industry. So don't feel shy. Feel free to ask us whatever questions you have. We're happy to have this conversation with you. You mentioned, Vincent, that you started in the entertainment industry before, and then you said games. So it sounds like you were in the wider space and then narrowed into gaming. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, what happened actually was when I was 29, I was working in a music store in West Los Angeles. It was a big music store. Everybody came in there from the Sex Pistols to Madonna. I used to even do studio gigs for Danny Elfman from Oingo Boingo. When he couldn't make it, he'd send me. Kind of interesting. We both had the same sampling machine, and we traded samples all the time. And so I had his library, he had my library, so he could send me on a gig, and they're doing a Toyota commercial and they want a sound for the truck going through the mud, and I just picked something that I knew if I played it down in a low enough register on the keyboard that it wouldn't sound like anything except some weird noise, because it would be out of its range, right?
Out of its range, right?
Frequency range. So with sampling, as you probably know, if the piano, you need to sample every key. So if you only have one key sample, by the time you get to the end of the piano, it doesn't sound like piano anymore. At any rate, so I used to work music stores. And one of the guys I worked with said, I'm going to work for Yamaha Corporation, and they're telling me I need a consultant. You want to come? I said, sure. So that was it. I was out of the musical instrument business, and I had learned how to program synthesizers while I was in the musical instrument business, FM synthesizers and analog synthesizers. And I'm talking about, what Pete Townsend used on, Won't Get Fooled Again, whatever that song is. So from there, I started I worked for Yamaha Corporation as a consultant with this guy, Bob Fry, who's really a great, he's incredible, actually. And he lives in New York now, but he can't get a job, even though he's probably one of the best sound engineers I've ever met. He knows more about, computer software codecs and all of the things that go into making sound on a computer and making the fidelity, the smallest file size and the highest fidelity. He knows all about that stuff. So I went to work with him at Yamaha, and while I was there was no, this was like 1987, there was no internet. I was the only sales guy in the store to have a computer on my desk. It was an Apple IIc. It's pretty funny. So I had an affinity for sound. And so when Yamaha pulled the plug on the American consultants, basically prototypes would come in from Japan. I worked for the Digital Musical Instrument Division, the DMI division. of Yamaha. They make golf clubs, they make pianos, they make everything, right? Toilets, you name it, they make it. It's a interesting company at any rate. So they put me in business, actually. I was programming sounds along with other sound programmers, and I started selling them through magazine ads in Keyboard Magazine, for instance. Buy a new synthesizer for $25. So basically the idea was that instead of having 6 synthesizers, you could have one and have a whole library of sounds for it. Let's say it held 100 sounds. And so you pull out the card or the floppy disk or whatever, put in another one. So one of them's labeled wedding sounds. And so every sound you would need at a wedding, organs, strings, pianos, whatever. Another one would be film soundtrack, all ethereal sounds. Another one would be, sound effects. And so the idea was the sounds that they shipped with these machines were always rushed, just like games being rushed to market. Everybody rush. With Yamaha, they would have 3 prototypes of the machines. We would take them down to the chip level. We would compare them to the competitors, and we would give them our feedback. And they never listened to us. And at the time, they had a keyboard that was really smoking hot. It was called the DX7. It was very famous. And it was probably on every record made in the 80s, late 80s to actually probably early 80s through the 90s, actually. Anything R&B especially. So I got into this mode of entrepreneur, right? So all of a sudden I was living in Malibu. I was living in this condo, and my garage I turned into a little kind of recording studio. And I used to open my garage door like at 3 in the afternoon, because I'd go down there like 6 a.m. At 3 in the afternoon, I'd open my garage, and literally I lived at the edge of the cliff, and I could see the whales migrating, up north or south, depending on time of year. I was that close to the ocean. The ocean put me to sleep at night. That's how close it was. And I worked there, and the manager of this complex found out I wasn't keeping my car in the garage, and so he was my age or older, and he got a little upset, and we talked, and he said, "Hey, can you get me this?" And he pulls out a brochure, and it's a Yamaha brochure for a stereo, giant stereo, giant speakers, the whole 9 yards. I said, "Yeah, I can get you one of those at cost." So ever since I did that for him, he never bothered me about my garage. And when I opened my garage at 3 in the afternoon, the fog would roll in. So I'd be working in my garage, and the fog would be up to my knees. And after a while, I started thinking, this fog is probably salt water based fog. It's going to rust all my stuff, So I didn't do that very much after a while. But the leap from that to computer sounds was because Yamaha pulled the plug. They just didn't feel the American consultants were contributing to the, to the overall sales, let's just say. We were recommending features that they didn't think they needed, and the competition was pummeling them. And so when they pulled the plug, I got into an entrepreneurial mode of selling sounds for keyboards. And then I got this idea, what if I sold other sounds? And there was a guy named Bo Tomlin who had this little app, if you will, application actually. And you would install it into your system on a Macintosh or a PC, and it would allow you to assign sounds to any keyboard function, any keyboard. So if you ejected let's say you put a disk in your computer, we had a collection of sounds for Star Trek, and Mr. Spock would say, "Computing now, Captain," as soon as you put the disc in. And all your keys were all of the sounds of this bridge of the Enterprise circa 1966 or whatever it was. And so we sold these collections of sounds at the Egghead software stores. I don't even know if you know those stores, but that was the big giant software chain back in the 90s. And it's kind of a long story, but we have some time. So I had a few people that were interested in kind of getting out of their grind and getting into something more creative. And they were multifaceted, multi-talented people. You know, their core maybe art, but they were just as good as copywriting as they were at art, for instance. And so I used to do some research, and they didn't call it the zeitgeist back then, but I did a lot of research into pop culture and what people liked, and you know, what was in the zeitgeist, you know. And so went on to the BBS because there was no internet at the time, and I could see that people were trading. It was huge numbers. They were trading Star Trek sounds, Simpsons sounds, and the Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Those were the 3 top sellers. Okay, so I went to all 3 studios. Fox was the Simpsons. They said, "No, who are you?" And I took a box, a mock-up box, the whole thing. I took the sounds too, because they were out there. I just took them off the BBS. It sounded horrible because people used their little tiny microphone that came with Sound Blaster, held it up to their television and recorded sounds. And so I went to Paramount, and they were like, by then I had a pitch. I said to Paramount, I said, "Look, if you guys let this go, at some point it's going to be declared fair use, and you're not going to have a legal argument. Somebody's going to say, you've known these sounds are out there for 20 years and didn't do anything about it, and now you want money for them? So why don't you get a leap on it now and license the sounds to me, and I'll sell them." And they said, "Let's think about it." So a couple of days later, they called me and they said, "Why don't you come in?" So I went in. They explained to me. Today, it's very different. Today, studios have 360 deals. I'm sure you know what that is. It's like they sign an actor.
For those who don't know, please go ahead.
They sign an actor and they get all the rights. And so an actor's in a movie, they get all the rights to everything. You know, when they option your book, they get all the rights to make the movie into whatever they want. And, you know, things are changing a little more, you know, collaboration now, but back then there was none. That's why there were so many bad movies and so many bad, you know, interpretations of books and so many bad licensed games and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, Paramount decided to do a deal with me, but they said, "Look, here's what you're up against. Number one, you have to deal with AFTRA. You have to deal with the Screenwriters Guild. You have to deal with their pension funds. You have to pay into all of this. And you have to call all of the actors." And the crew of the Enterprise, let's see, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 or 7 on the crew. And I paid them 25 cents a box each. And people at Paramount told me, "You have to get Leonard Nimoy or William Shatner won't do it." And so I got everybody, including Leonard Nimoy, and I dealt with all their lawyers and their agents. But one day, I was joking around with Bob, my sound guy, and he was saying, "Wow, I can't believe you got all those actors, but what about William Shatner?" I said, "I don't know. I've been trying to get a hold of his agent. I can't get a hold of anybody." I said, "You know, it's really weird." And 10 minutes later, somebody says, "Hey, there's some guy on the phone. He says he's William Shatner." And I pick up the phone and I say, "Hey, Bob, you know, you don't have to try and fool me like this. You know he's not going to call me. I hung up. It was William Shatner calling me from his car. He probably had the first car phone, because I could hear jazz music in the background. And so I said, shit, right? So he calls me back. He goes, hey, why'd you hang up on me? And that was kind of weird to explain, right? But he just kept asking me, so Leonard's agreed to this, right? I said, yeah, he's agreed to this. He must have asked me that 4 times. And then I just shut up. And 2 minutes went by and he said, okay, I'll do it. And from that point on, he would send me little notes on his letterhead, like every 6 months, saying, hey, you're doing a great job in this cottage industry. I never knew we could make money out of it like this, I mean, we sold hundreds of thousands of Star Trek sounds. It only fit hundreds of thousands of boxes. We could only fit 50 sounds on a disc, and they were 8-bit, and they weren't even stereo. That's a 3.5 floppy disk. They were compressed like crazy. And Paramount gave us the 35 millimeter tapes from their archives, the original tapes from 1966. The only copies they gave them to me.
The originals.
The originals. And I had to take them somewhere and get them digitized. And then I gave tapes back to Paramount. And then Bob went to work digitizing the sounds, taking out all the background noise and everything so that we could isolate, what we needed, whether it was a sound bite, an actor talking like he's dead Jim or whatever. That's how the whole thing kind of started, and it kind of evolved to desktop utilities. And at some point, there was a screensaver company called Berkeley Systems. And the CEO of Berkeley Systems, his name is Wes Boyd. He is now the CEO of MoveOn.org. Kind of interesting, right? And he called me one day, and he said, and Paramount gave me a heads up, so I knew the call was coming. And Wes told me this story about when Star Trek was canceled, his whole family, him, his wife, his 2 kids, they all dressed up in Star Trek uniforms and sent pictures and letters, please don't cancel the show. And so Wes says, so I want to make Star Trek the screensaver. But Paramount says, you have the license exclusively for the sounds. And so I have to sub-license them from you. So we made a deal. And that started my kind of deal-making days, He gave me a $250,000 advance. It was non-recoupable, non-refundable, and he gave me $1 a box. He must have sold 500,000 boxes.
Did you say you got a $250,000 advance?
Yeah. So, at any rate, later, the advances got much bigger later, believe me. So I went from sounds to screensavers, because I said to Wes, I'll do it, but you guys have to teach my people how to make screensavers. He said, okay, but you can't compete with me. I said, I'm not going to compete with you. So I didn't. But I could get more licenses than he could. I looked at legacy stuff like The Twilight Zone, I Love Lucy.
We got a question really quickly. Steve Fowler, thanks for joining us. Steve wants to know, what year was that?
That was in 1991, I believe, maybe 1992, possibly.
And I want to apologize to you, Vincent, and everybody watching. There actually, Mario didn't have something happen. That's on me. He asked me for the link to the green room, and I forgot to send it to him. So I apologize, Mario, if you're watching this as part of the audience. I just texted you. Please click the link, and we want you to join the conversation. So hopefully he'll join. If not, then he'll certainly enjoy watching the recording later. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. it was really interesting because the industry was in its infancy and games were pretty much only on PCs at that time, like Wolfenstein and I can't remember some of the games, but the first 3D shooter games,
Yeah,
came
Duke
out.
Nukem, Doom.
Yeah, all those came
Yeah.
out on PC around that window between 1990 and 1995.
I
And so,
remember that I could see them, but I wasn't allowed to play them. That
yeah,
I
I
was
can understand.
95. I think I was 9.
Your parents were smart because those games
Yeah.
were, because there were no ratings back then,
Oh, there weren't.
they were bloody.
Those are some crazy games.
Yes, and Acclaim Entertainment was a distributor for us for a while, and they put out Mortal Kombat. So they were the take two of their time. Okay,
Yeah.
and it's funny because they were distributing product for us, and they owed me like $1 million, and they wouldn't pay me, and they said the stuff isn't selling. I said that's bullshit. So we hired some accounting firm, Deloitte, somebody, and went in and counted the boxes in their warehouse and said, "Yeah, you owe Vincent $797,000." No, we're not paying him any money. So went to arbitration because the contract said that's what was going to happen. We went to arbitration, and these guys are screaming at me, yelling at me. And the judge, he's like 90, right? He's a retired judge. He's an arbitrator doing arbitration, and he sends me out of the room and my guys, and he says, you sued them for fraud. He goes, you can't sue them for fraud. You entered into a contract. I said, it's fraud in the inducement. He goes, yeah, but you can't do that. Here's why. And he told me. He goes, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell them that you have a fraud case because they owe you the money. So then they went in the room separately. He told them, listen, they have a fraud case against you. And they paid me in 2 payments. They gave me a check that day for like $390, and they gave me a check a month later for the other $390, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And one of the CEOs, it was a co-CEO company. One of the CEOs is a friend of mine today, which is really funny. But I don't want to get off track here. I want to kind of keep my timeline straight here. So we went from selling sounds to selling screensavers, and we had a developer in Rhode Island, and it's funny. One day, one of my guys brought me a industry magazine, and in the back of it was a tiny little ad, like about 2 by 2 inches, and it said Rhode Island Soft Systems, and we specialize in making the best screensavers in the world. And so I checked, and they did. And so I called the CEO, and we got on a train, or I got on a plane, and we went. I don't remember where we went, but we ended up somewhere on the East Coast and took a train to Rhode Island. So we went through Nantucket and all this stuff, and it was like in October. It was amazing. And there were like 3 of us. And so we got to see their whole operation. This guy was president of the Screensaver Shareware Association at the time. And so we did this Terminator 2 screensaver. And Arnold Schwarzenegger's agent, Lou Pitt, was a real pit bull. He wanted $100,000 guarantee deposit now. I scraped up the $100,000 and I gave it to him. And we made T2 the screensaver, Terminator T2 Judgment Day, the screensaver. And it was really cool. It was very animated. It showed the robots being built and all kinds of stuff. And it was we took out ads in all the trades, and it said, and this goes to my art director who could also write copy, Terminator 2, the screensaver, it absolutely will not stop selling. It was pretty funny, kind of a, play on the whole Terminator thing. We had the Skynet computer in there and everything. And so we got really good at making these screensavers. And so we did, Deep Space Nine, because all of a sudden Star Trek was nothing, and all of a sudden it was back, with Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager and so on and so on, and it still continues to this day. I can tell you that a lot of people just lost their jobs at Paramount. Because a lot of bad decisions have been made over the last 20, 30 years. But Star Trek has never let them down. Without Star Trek, nobody would have jobs there. It is still.
I used to have a Star Trek Super Nintendo game, SNES.
Yeah, it is still the cash cow for that studio. And now it's going to be Skydance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, at any rate, so we could tell things were changing in the retail space because they didn't want to carry screensavers anymore. They wanted productivity software and games. And so the shelf space went from facing out boxes to spined boxes. So our Terminator 2 box, for instance, had, chrome foil T2. And the face of Arnold that was half robot and half Arnold, the robot half had a foil red eye. It was a great box. And it was spined. It wasn't even front facing.
Couldn't even see it.
We sold a gazillion of them. So we sold a lot of screensavers for a while, and then they didn't want to carry them anymore. So we thought, okay, so CD-ROMs had come out. So now we're looking at 1994, 95. And I needed to raise some money because, I had built it from pretty much, I think the sound for musical instrument part of the company got to $1 million and kind of petered out. There's not that many musicians around the world that can buy sounds and, get up to the $1 million range in their sound collections and, in a worldwide way. I mean, they sell like 5,000 units. They're not like they're selling hundreds of thousands of these keyboards,
Right.
And so we all were like, in our mid-30s at that time, and we all had kids at that time, and there were little kids, and we decided, let's make CD-ROMs for kids. And I had an idea for something, and I said, can we make an interactive storybook that includes video clips? I want to call it the interactive movie book. So we did. We made it. And I joined the International Reading Association to learn about, how teachers teach reading and how it works and everything. And I found, which is still true today, I'm told, that 80% of fourth graders can read phonically, but do not understand what they're reading. So the video was there to make the light bulb go off. So the computer would read to them, or it was two modes, kind of a babysitting mode, put the kid on the chair in front of the computer would do everything. Read it to them, videos would play automatically, little movie theater would open, the videos would play. They'd be about 1 minute long, 2 minutes long, maybe. Or you could have the child in your lap, 3 to 11 to kind of the range. And the sweet spot was probably 4 to 8. And we did a bunch of interactive movie books. We did a deal with Steven Spielberg's company. We did The Land Before Time, which is the baby dinosaurs, right? instead of the
I
Jurassic.
had that on VHS. I have parts of that movie memorized.
So they made a bunch of those movies or home video, The Land Before Time, and we made a bunch of Land Before Time stuff, including PS1 games. But
Okay.
while we were making the PC games, one day I was at Grauman's Chinese Theater, I think, and I was watching Apollo 13. The place was packed, and they played 3 trailers before Apollo 13, and one of the trailers was the Babe movie. The entire audience gave a standing ovation to the trailer. It was unbelievable. The next day, I was at Universal. Hey, Nancy. Nancy Cushing Jones was the president of licensing. And she scared me. She was kind of a battle axe, you know? And now she's one of my best friends. She kind of went from battle axe to mentor to friend. And now she gives me referrals and all kinds of shit. But I said to her, she had a poster on her wall of Babe, hadn't come out yet. I said, how about that? Because I had just seen the movie, right? And she said, you don't want that. You definitely don't want that, Vince. I wouldn't tell that to my sister. And I said, well, I saw the movie last night, and this is what happened in the theater. She said, you're kidding. She goes, I can't believe it. She goes, you can have it for $15,000. So I took it and I ran with it. I made a Babe the Interactive movie book. I did 2 deals with Warner Brothers. I did Black Beauty and The Secret Garden, more traditional stuff, live action. And I did deals with Universal / Spielberg's company. And I did An American Tale, and I did a bunch of Land Before Time stuff. And then we started making other things like activity centers, math adventures, reading adventures. We even did science. We did science learning adventures. And that was Lost in Space, the movie. And so we did a Lost in Space screensaver from Lost in Space from the 60s. And we did Lost in Space movie book we did the Lost in Space science adventure actually for the older kids, essentially. The other one was for people older, for their computers who were collectible, kind of collectors of, just like people collect toys now, right? Star Wars toys or whatever. The collectible market today is definitely older adults. And so went through this whole phase. I was on CNN. They used to have the Hollywood Minute. And they said, what happens when a story can be told on a computer and you can see the movie too? Well, it's called the Interactive Movie Book. And I'm here with Vincent Pettetti at the CES show in Las Vegas and blah, blah, blah. And they don't have that anymore, on CNN. But I have the video of it. But got a lot of free press because the stuff was different. And it was, we did stuff like Dragonheart, the movie with Sean Connery, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did a Dragonheart activity center. We did a Hercules and Xena. Did all kinds of stuff.
So how does that experience then prepare you for working in the gaming industry?
Well, one day at CES, I was approached by some guys from TDK Corporation of Japan, but they were Europeans. They were from TDK Europe, so they were German or British, because I think their main manufacturing plant at the time was in Benelux, and it was interesting to watch VHS tapes being made. It was completely automated, and the VHS tapes are being assembled. The tape is being spooled into them. The screws are being put in, everything, with no humans. Only time humans got involved is if a screw went in the wrong way and crooked or something, and then somebody would have to stop the assembly line and fix it. And they were making like 75,000 tapes a day or some shit, VHS tapes. And so it was TDK Europe that approached me and said, we want to get in this business. We'll do all the PC stuff you have, but you need to localize it into 7 languages for us. And so we did. And then they said, you know, we want to make PlayStation 1 games too, and we want to make Game Boy games. And so that's what got me into games. So we used the same children's characters that we had licenses for, and then we branched out. We were always kind of family friendly. We never made blood and guts or anything like that. The products were actually really fun. And then at some point, again, actually in 1995, I needed to raise money. And the game business in 2005 was only $10 billion. Today it's like $250 billion. So
Right.
in 1995, it was probably, you know, $5 billion, maybe, you know, 7. So there wasn't a whole cadre of gaming VCs out there, you know. Nobody was investing, basically. So we did a reverse merger into a public shell. And, you know, people talk about the SEC and how, you know, they arrest people and have people arrested and do all this crap. And they're as complicit as can be in it, letting all this stuff happen. I mean, really, they let people, and they still do it today to some degree, but it's not quite as bad. But back in the mid 90s, you could put together what was called a blind pool. So you and 4 of your friends could put in some money, create a shell company, put in $1,000, create a shell company, get it listed on NASDAQ, and or get it ready to be listed on NASDAQ, get your S1 filed, and but you don't pull the trigger until you get a company to back into it, a company with revenues. And that's how we ended up on the NASDAQ for a $5 million debt offering. And the investment bankers that took us public, they created 2 classes of stock, common stock and warrants. Are you familiar with warrants?
No.
It's a class of securities that is traded alongside of stocks. It just has a W at the end of it. So we were SSII or SSIIW. So we did a debt offering. So we got $5 million in a private placement, and it was debt. And the list, Arnold Schwarzenegger Trust, the David Schwimmer Trust, it was a who's who of Hollywood invested in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the road show. You know, we made a compilation tape of all the licenses and the trailers, and I went to all the places, all the boiler rooms where they call the mom and pops and sell them stock, you know.
Yep.
And so when we went public on the NASDAQ, there was a hiccup, and the NASDAQ said, and we didn't like these guys anyway. They were shysters. And so the NASDAQ said, actually, it was not NASDAQ, it was, at the time, it was the enforcement arm of NASDAQ, which today I think is called FINRA, but back then it was called something else. At any rate, they said, well, we need to see proof of the money that these guys say they put into the shell. So these guys faxed over pictures of $100 bills. So the SEC disallowed it. So these guys that owned like 60% of the company now owned nothing.
Yeah.
And we had these great lawyers out of Washington, D.C., who knew exactly what was happening. And I got a big education out of that, of course. And then Sarbanes-Oxley got passed, you know, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, because of insider trading and all that stuff. And it's funny because I had to go to all these classes, and I was at this one class, and it's being taught by ex-SEC enforcement guys, ex-NASDAQ enforcement guys, and they're telling stories about, you know, how people get caught. And so they're telling this one story about this guy that bought all this stock, and it put a little blip, and when it gets over a certain percentage, it just automatically feeds them the name of the person that bought it or sold it.
Yeah.
And so they start watching that person. So this guy had bought stock in his company that he worked for, and he was an executive, but he wasn't the CEO. So they started tracking this guy, and their quarterly earnings were going to come out. And I don't remember if they were going to drop or if they were going to go up, but he was at a baseball game with his wife. And behind him were two guys from the NASDAQ enforcement arm. And he told his wife at the baseball game that he had to stop at a phone booth to call his broker to tell him to sell everything on Monday morning. And literally, they followed him. They traced the call from the phone booth, and they arrested him Tuesday morning at his house. And they said, when you get a call from them after the market closes, you tell them you have to talk to your lawyer. You don't talk to them ever. So they were telling these horrific stories, you know. And I never did anything illegal, but funny enough, you know, like after TDK came in and we were TDK, not Sound Source anymore, some point like near 2001, I was out to lunch and I got a phone call. I had a BlackBerry, I think. Was that a phone or just an email thing? I'm trying to remember. At any rate, it said the FBI is here. They want to talk to you. So everybody in my office is like, "Oh, what the hell's going on with Vince? The FBI is here." So the FBI is in the conference room, and they're drilling me on this public offering that happened, you know, 5 years ago. I let them talk, and I said, you know, where the hell were you 5 years ago when these guys, A, created a public shell out of a blind pool trust, B, made a fortune off the warrants because anybody who invested got free warrants. They called it a sweetener. So if you put in 100 grand, you got like 50,000 warrants. The warrants had a strike price of $4.25. So to turn a warrant into a share, you had to pay $4.25. But they didn't do that. All they did was sell their warrants. So one investment banker on the West Coast, one investment banker on the East Coast, selling the warrants back and forth to their clients. We were the 7th highest traded stock on the day we went public, and it wasn't the common stock; it was the freaking warrants. Those warrants.
That sounds like crypto. That sounds like
so those warrants had up to $3. $3. So they got them for nothing. Some of the people paid a quarter, but they sold them for $3. Meanwhile, the
more things change, the more they say the same.
Yes, exactly. Meanwhile, the common stock starts to go down, you know, from $5 to $4, and then all of a sudden, the NASDAQ merges with the American Stock Exchange, and they change their rules. So to be listed on NASDAQ, the entrepreneur's, you know, place to sell stock, you had to meet certain requirements. Now, stock couldn't fall below $1 for more than 30 days. You had to meet some net cap requirements. You had to, there was something else. There were 3 criteria, and if you missed one of them, then you were delisted and you were, you know, relegated to the OTC, the over-the-counter market, which is still fully reporting no difference than being on NASDAQ, except it's tainted. You know, people think that OTC stocks are all fly-by-night companies, and we were not a fly-by-night company. So I had that albatross around my neck for 10 years. We were a public company for 10 years.
Terry
So
wanted to share that he can relate to some of your story. He was a previous guest on the podcast. Shout out to you, Terry. Thanks for tuning in. But yeah, he shared some great stories as well. But yes, please keep going.
at any rate, so, but I had $5 million to work with. And so that opened up kind of a new chapter for us. And so we started making console games. And then
Mhm.
right about the same time, I met TDK, and I kind of had the wherewithal to engage with them. And I was able to do what they wanted. And so um, it was a great relationship from like 1997 until I think in the year 2000. I I said something stupid because they kept putting in money like $1 million, guarantee, non-recoupable, non-refundable, um, for the exclusive rights in Europe and Australia and New Zealand and Japan. And I think we did that 3 times. And then I opened my stupid mouth and I said, "Why don't you just buy us?"
Mm.
And they said, "You know what? That's not a bad idea." So TDK invested $5 million, bought 70% of the company under one condition: Mr. Vitetti doesn't get any money.
What?
Doesn't get any of this money. You're going to create from your treasury. You're going to create more shares, give them to us, and you don't get any money. You can get money when we sell this thing down the road, and we're not anticipating selling this company for a very long time. So
You made the recommendation, and because you made the recommendation, they decided to spite you. Can you help me understand the
no,
rationale there?
I think that the Europeans really wanted it to happen and convinced Japan to give them the 5 million. But that's not how it ended up happening. What ended up happening was Japan said, "Well, why should we funnel it through Europe when we have a holding company in New York that handles the 20 subsidiaries in the United States? The only difference between this subsidiary and the others is this one is a public company, which is better for us because, if we can get them back on the NASDAQ, and then if we sell them, we could make a lot of money, or they could access public markets to raise more money, and we don't have to keep giving them money every year."
Right.
So things were really great for a while. Over 3 years, I took that company from zero in console sales to $350 million. And they sold the company for $25 million. It was a travesty. And there was a point.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry. You took the company from zero in sales to 350 million in console sales
in 3 years. Okay.
In 3 years.
And it was profitable.
And despite you generating $350 million in sales, the company sold for less than 10% of that?
$25 million. And they excluded me from the compensation committee. They excluded me from they didn't want me involved in the sale. I had to be, arm's length, basically.
Right.
And I went to them. I had gotten this offer from Activision. Activision offered $20,500,000 for the Shrek sub-license for movie 2 and 3. I already had movie 2 in development with 2 developers, one doing the console games, one doing the handheld games, and the PC stuff. And they were probably 6 months into a 2.5-year cycle, maybe a 3-year cycle. And I had to pull the plug on all those games and pay those developers a couple of milestones. That was the contract, right? And I said to TDK, I called a board meeting. We had a board meeting, and I said, we have this offer from Activision. If I wouldn't have gone to the board, they would have strung me up anyway, because, you know, it's $20 million of pure profit. I mean, there was no way I could say no by myself. I didn't have that kind of power. So the board said yes. And I said, you understand that if you have any intentions of selling this company anytime soon, you're not going to get much money for it, because without Shrek, it's just not worth that much money. It was the Star Trek of our company, okay? And so it was driving, you know, most of the sales, like 70% of the sales. We would make retailers take other titles if they wanted Shrek, basically. And so they said, we have no intentions of selling this company. And guess what happened 6 months later? I get a call and they say, we're selling the company. TDK New York called me. I said, what happened to we have no intention of selling the company? Well, you know, in Japan, they had a board meeting and, you know, you lost money last quarter. Yeah, we lost money last quarter. It takes 3 years to develop a game. It costs $5 million to develop a game. It's on 5 platforms for $5 million. We're being outspent by the big guys, but we are, THQ was at 500 million. We were at 350. We weren't that far behind them. I mean, we would have caught up with them easy. And they were a licensed software company, just like us. Everything was a license. Whether it was Worldwide Wrestling Federation or whatever, everything was licensed. And I beat them to all these licenses. I got the UFC, I got Shrek, I got Pirates of the Caribbean, I got the Haunted Mansion, I got all kinds of stuff that everybody else passed over. The downside was I had to put out these games day and date with movies and stuff. And so, you know, I'm sitting at DreamWorks and they're telling me the movie's coming out in 4 months. You have to have a game with the movie. And the DVD will be out in 11 months, and you have to have a console game with the DVD. That's what you're signing up for. So I made a playable game for 5, 6, 7-year-old boys on Game Boy Color. It was a fighting game. It was called Shrek Fairy Tale Freakdown. And we sold like 4 million copies in 7 languages. And then Sony, when we went to Sony about the console, Sony said, no way, we're not going to let you make a game for the PlayStation in 11 months. Not happening, Vince. Went to Nintendo, they said, we don't have any dev systems. The GameCube was in prototype, so we don't have any dev systems to give you. And we went to Microsoft, and they said, if you use this developer, we'll do it, because this developer has a programmer who understands the Xbox better than anybody on the planet. If you use them, we'll do it. So they did it. And they cocked it up at every press conference. Shrek, Shrek, Shrek. Our stock went back to $5. We were on our way back to the NASDAQ when they decided to sell the company, basically. And the sequence of events are kind of weird, but when the suitor was Take-Two. Take-Two bought TDK Media Active. Take-Two, who made all these, you know, violent games, decided they wanted a family-friendly division on the West Coast. And if you listened into their conference call, they said, we believe this acquisition will be accretive. We believe Vincent is a... He knows how to pick content. He knows what will make a good game. He knows what people like. He knows what will sell. He has an instinctive thing for it. Little did they know, I did a lot of research before ever bought a license. I did research. I mean, I took Pirates of the Caribbean because 100 million people had been on the ride. That's why I took that license.
Mm-hmm.
And they only gave me 7 months to make a game. So I said, I'm not making a console game. They said, you can use the Bethesda pirate engine and reskin it. I said, I'm not doing that. So if you want to do a deal, I'll do it for the Game Boy Advance. But I'll take the Haunted Mansion as well, and I'll do it on 5 platforms, including PC. So I did a deal with Disney, and that was the deal. And I truly, to this day, do not understand what went down, because in the closing documents, it took forever. It took 6 months to close the deal because every license had to be transferred to Take-Two, and
Right.
every license says these licenses are not transferable. You have to renegotiate a license to be transferable. So I had picked the Muppets. Everybody told me I was nuts. And I told everybody Disney's going to buy them. You just watch. But by then Disney had bought them. And Disney said, we're not going to renew your license. You can see it to the end, but we're not going to renew it because we have other plans. But every other license got transferred. Even the Shrek sub-license got transferred. And the sub-license, Activision gave us $20,500,000 and a 20% royalty on every box that was sold. DreamWorks wanted $4 million for the transfer, and Take-Two said, we don't need Shrek. And so Take-Two bought the company. And there are other things I found out just 2 years ago that just blow my mind too, but I'll get to that. But basically, they wanted 3 executives to have employment agreements, but they dropped all those conditions except mine. They wanted an employment agreement with me. They were going to pay me $75,000 more. But I had a contract with TDK that had 2 years left, and they were paying me a lot of money. And it had a termination clause that basically says, if you steal or embezzle or get arrested for a felony, we can terminate you for cause. Mm-hmm. Other than that, we can't terminate you for cause. Well, the Take-Two contract, they could terminate me for any reason. And it just smelled bad. Right. And I wouldn't sign it. And they said, you don't trust us? I said, I don't trust anybody. And with this kind of shit, you guys aren't going to give me a clause like that? This makes no sense to me, because you have to pay me out. If you fire me, you have to pay me out 2 years of income. And all of my perks, you have to pay for my car for 2 years, you pay my health insurance for 2 years, you have to pay my life insurance for 2 years, all this stuff. And they wouldn't budge. So the day the deal closed, Jeff Lappin came into my office. He was the CEO at the time. And he started showing me pictures of his college sorority, I guess, fraternity, whatever it is. And he's showing me all these pictures of all of his friends. And I gave him back the pictures. I said, Jeff, just pay me. He goes, you're kidding. It's that easy? I said, what do you want me to do? Fight for my job? You don't want me. Just pay me. Just pay me. So they didn't just pay me. They paid me out over 2 years. They were supposed to pay me then, right then. And they drug it out over 2 years. And if they didn't keep 2 of my employees, which was my VP of operations and my VP of HR, they made those women run the company for them. And
I want to connect you. Sorry, when you finish that statement, but I want to connect you with Steve on LinkedIn. He wants you to speak to his students at USC. He's got to jump.
I would love
Remind
to.
me, Vince. I want to connect you to Steve. Keep going.
Great.
Sorry.
So, where was I?
You had your boss gave you the pictures, and you said,
Oh yeah. And so,
pay me.
yeah, they dragged their feet every month. I had to get paid every month. I had to pull teeth, and if it wasn't for those two women still being there, that I probably wouldn't have gotten paid. But not only did that all happen, but it derailed my life, literally. And 2 weeks later, I got a call from the CEO of Crave Entertainment. And he offered me a job of president of games. They had a little gaming division. They were a $200 million company, but it was all distribution. They would buy last year's Madden games, last year's whatever games. They buy them for $3 or whatever, and they resell them for $19.99. They had the racks. They owned the real estate in Toys R Us, et cetera, et cetera. And they had like 5 slots for their own games. So Crave made games. So I had a team of about 30 people at Crave. Basically, we farmed out the product development to developers, and Crave would only pay $500,000 for 3 platforms. And I just instinctively put a license on everything. They made lifestyle games. So they had a bowling game, for instance. I called Brunswick, and I got the Brunswick license. They had a snowboarding game. I found out who the champion snowboarder was. It was Jamie Little, and got her into the game. They had a poker game, and it was going to be late. It wasn't going to make Christmas. And I said, I can't get a poker license. Poker was just becoming big, on Bravo.
I remember that. So that's 2004, 2005 then?
Yeah. 2005, 2006, but right there.
Yeah. Right in there. Yeah.
And so they said, yeah, we're going to wait for a big fish like Electronic Arts. I said, okay. So I called a friend, president of licensing at New Line Cinema. His name is David Imhoff. And I asked his advice. He said, Vince, here's the best advice I can give you. Call it World Championship Poker. They're going to think it's a TV show. Don't tell them it isn't. And that's what I did. And we sold 4 million copies. And I did a deal with Sony for the iToy, which came out of Europe. So you could play it with 7 people. And you could tell a tell. And Microsoft had it built in. And I took the champions in poker at the time, Annie Lederer, Howard Lederer, a brother and sister who won like millions of dollars in tournaments, and other players, got their likenesses and their stuff, and gave them a royalty per box. And so I've done a lot of licensing and business development and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, part of the reason that TV Kid got sold so cheap was, number one, was that they didn't have Shrek. Number 2 was that they wanted out really bad. And number 3, licensed games are not your property. You're renting them.
Yeah, you're renting, right?
So you've got, what are you selling? You're selling the ability to get great licenses, and that's it. So it's not like we had 4 companies wanting to buy us. We had one. It was Take-Two. And their motivations were ominous. They fired everybody. They kept 2 people and 122 testers, and they turned the whole place into a testing facility for their B games, for their crummy games.
Right.
I went to work for Crave, and I made Crave $32 million in 12 months, and they had done $6 million the year before, just by rebranding getting the developers paid, because Crave never paid their bills on time. All the testers were gas was as high as it is now, I think, and the testers were getting paid nothing, and they were being brought in by a temp agency. And I went to NEMA with a spreadsheet, and I said, get rid of the temp agency. You're paying them a 30% premium. Bring them on full time. Give them basic health insurance. You'll have better morale. We'll have better testing, and it'll save you money. And he did that. And he had some ulterior motives too. There was a guy he wanted to hire for the job, and he didn't want the job, so I was the second guy on the list, evidently. So after a year, this other guy decided he wanted the job, and Nima was a really good friend of his. Nima is a Persian guy, so he had a Persian wedding. There was only one American guy there, and that was the guy. So when he wanted the job, Nima gave him the job. And all of a sudden, I'm supposed to report to this guy. So the guy comes into my office and he says, Vince, the difference between me and you think those people out there are assets. They're expendable. They're not assets. They're liabilities. That's the difference between you and me. I said, Rob, you're right. And I quit. And I left. That was it. I gave up 2% of the company, which they sold for $250 million a year later, because I quit. Wow. I should have sued him for wrongful termination. I should have done all this stuff, but it's not in my nature to litigate unless there's a reason. I guess there was a reason, but at the time it was more of a principle, right? And I did sue a claim because they owed me money, but I didn't sue NEMA because it was like, okay, I'm not wanted here, so have at it, Rob.
So I have a question for you. I know we're running into an hour here, and we're having an awesome conversation. I know you did, but these are awesome stories, and I told you we had this conversation before that tell the full stories because these are amazing, and we need to hear more of them. I think we're going to have a two-part conversation, so I want to share one of the photos you sent that's not related to video games as a primer for the next conversation.
All right.
As a commercial break, and when you briefly kind of tee that one up, then I want to get back to talking about ageism, because obviously you have extensive experience in the gaming industry. You've worked nearly 3 decades in the space and led and innovated some of the best deals for some of the most well-known IPs in the industry. And unfortunately, your recent experiences have not reflected that wealth of experience.
All right.
So I want to talk about that, but before, so that people know that there's got to be a part 2 to this. Let me share one of these images. If you'll spend just 2 to 3 minutes kind of talking about what it is, and then we're gonna talk about ageism, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let me see if I can do this. Window, image. This one here.
Pick a pretty one.
Yeah, they're all high definition and amazing. So I think I'll start with this because you have something special that you have created here. So if you want to talk about this very briefly, and then I'm going to put this away and we're going to talk about ageism, and we'll finish this conversation when we bring you back to the podcast.
All right. So I had a friend. He had cancer. He wanted to. It was legal in California anyway, and some other states. And the guy that made screensavers, he called me and said, "Hey, I know you're working on this thing for your friend with cancer. Why don't we join forces?" I was out of a job. I couldn't get a job in the game business. I was 49. I couldn't get a job. Nobody would hire me. And so I said, okay, let's do it. And this is what I built. This is made out of PVC. It weighs about 40 pounds. The wood is nothing more than a veneer made out of vinyl. It has, I have a US patent on it. It works on a negative pressure principle. So basically cannabis can't survive at 90 degrees inside of a box like that. It will die. So you have to keep your house at like 72, 73. And then the air gets sucked in from the bottom. There's 2 filter plates at the bottom, micron filters, so you don't get cat hair and other shit into the box. So fresh air goes into the box. There's 6 fans in the box, plus 2 fans on the light. So that's 8 fans in the box, lots of movement of air. You have to have a certain amount of PAR, photosynthetic active radiation, to grow plants and flowering plants in particular. But if the wattage is too high, the box will be too hot. You have to be able to evacuate the heat. And so air would come in, get moved around. It would hit a carbon scrubber about yay big. The carbon scrubber would take away the pot smell. That little thing on the side there is an exhaust vent. And the exhaust that came out, fresh air, just like you use activated charcoal in an aquarium to make the water clear instead of yellow.
Right.
Same principle kind of thing. And that plant is just one example of the kind of results. And we made these in China, in Ningbo, and I oversaw the assembly line and everything. We had to source 30 different parts. There was one piece of technology in it. It was controlled the exhaust fan speed. So if it got too hot, it would speed up on its own. If it got too cool, it would go down. If you lived on the East Coast and put it in your basement, the fan didn't run so fast. If you lived on the West Coast and it was hot, or in Arizona, the fan would go really fast, but it was still very quiet. The patent office turned it down 5 times, and the 6th time was the charm. And the patent officer said to me, we get paid to say no. This month we get paid to say yes. That's how I got that. Pretty funny.
All right, so we're gonna just put a pin in this conversation because we have to follow up. You've mentioned to me, and outside of this podcast, there's so much more to this story, and we want to make sure we have time to talk about all that.
Yeah, but I'm technically still the president of the company, and technically still on the board of directors, and we are actively trying to sell this piece of technology to somebody.
Okay.
But the company's still up and running. I'm just not.
You talked about that you got into this opportunity because you couldn't get a job at 49, right? And you're older than 49 now. So that's gonna bring us back full circle. I just want to take 5 or 10 minutes and talk about ageism and your experience. And I think that there's a misconception about
ageism.
Ageism. You've done your research, so I don't even want to put words in your mouth. I think I want to sit back and hear your perspective. What I do want to say is that I know that there has been research from AARP, which supports the 50+ community, that says that from a consumer perspective, the senior citizen community is one of the fastest growing consumer demographics in gaming, because they have a surplus. You have a surplus of both time as not you specifically, but that demographic has a surplus of time and expendable income. And unfortunately, that same demographic feels underrepresented in the games, in the features, in the UI, UX. So there is a commercial missed opportunity there. That said, I'm going to let you take away the rest of it here, and I'm going to we'll finish this cannabis conversation at another time.
All right.
So you've got plenty of sheets of paper. You're obviously, well read on this topic, and you've experienced it, unfortunately, yourself. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about it? Shed some light on your experience, and why do you think it happens, and maybe some potential solutions for it?
Well, it's systemic, and it's really about human emotions and human feelings. And 30-year-olds don't want to hang out with 60-year-olds or 65-year-olds. That's part of it. And the companies don't believe a 60-year-old can work 60 or 70 hours a week. And so ultimately, their answer is you're overqualified. But the truth is, in all the research I've done, it's either, as an example, it's either techno ageism, game ageism, too old to play games. You don't have the technological chops to deal with the issues with games. Ageism in general, and a lot of it is, it basically says here, this is from Game Industry Biz. It basically says that age, it's a stereotype. Ageism may be broadly defined as an age-related stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination against people because of their age. This type of stereotype is mostly applied to older adults and often relate to the denial or violation of human rights to older adults. It's a blend of the words age and ism. In specific, age corresponds to biological, psychological, and social changes that occur during a certain period of time in which a person has lived. Regarding the suffix ism, it is a multitude of meanings that may be subsumed: a distinctive practice, a system, political ideology, an artistic movement, or the basics for prejudice or discrimination. A number of studies have attempted to explain the reason this stereotype occurred in society, given that each generation claims that the stereotype may be due to the face of morality, and thus being in contact with older adults reminds us of the human condition and the limitations of time. So they think if they hire you, I'm 69. Okay, I couldn't get a job when I was 49. And I decided to get back in the gaming business in 2023. And nobody would hire me. And I called everybody I knew. One of the people I called was, she's the VP of HR at Konami. She used to work for me. And she called one of her good friends at Netflix Games, and he said, this guy does not have relevant gaming experience. That's what it was. He's been in the cannabis business for 7 years. I don't know if she gave him any pushback or not, but I couldn't even get an interview from anybody, not even a video interview. And so it was, she said to me, look, it's your age, Vince. I didn't tell you that, but it's your age. She goes, but I would get the relevant gaming experience so that that excuse can't be used. So I decided to call my friends in the business. And the first person I called was Tim Morton at Frost Giant Games. He had just raised $40 million. He was probably 8 months into the Stormgate RTS game. And Tim said, you know, Vince, I trust you implicitly. You gave me a chance and when nobody else would. And I'll bring you in as a consultant for how much do you charge per hour? And I told him, and he said, oh, it's not enough. So he brought me in for a lot of money, 3 days a week. He's like, only do it for a year. But it should give you the relevant experience you need. How much more experience do they want? Working on a live service game with a long tail, an RTS game, a complicated game. I mean, this is not, you know, an original IP. It is everything that, you know, that they would ask for, basically.
Yeah.
And even after that, I couldn't get an interview. And then some people called me and wanted an audience with Tim. And those people ended up being where I work now. And it's a company called the Shepherd's Studios. And it is a bespoke transmedia company. So instead of licensing, it is original IP. And we're working with original IP holders. So in other words, if you were a creator and had original IP and you wanted to get it out there in a game or a movie or whatever, we will take it and you give us 12 months, 9 months, 12 months to raise the money and get it out for you. And so we work with creators, and we have our own IP. This is one of our own IPs. And so we have an IP called The War Scrolls, and it's about the war in heaven. And basically, you are part of an elite group of angels. And it's kind of like you're working for the CIA of heaven, and you're sent down here, you're reincarnated down here, but you wake up as a bum or a drug addict or something, and you don't know you're an angel. And so you could turn bad or you could turn good. And so you end up finding people murdered in a house or something. And so you have to then react. And either good or bad, you have to react. And at the end of the movie, you know, you're either a good angel or you're Lucifer. And the same kind of, you know, you take the movie itself and then you make products from the movie. The video game does not have to follow the movie. That's the beauty of the transmedia model. The video game can be another story arc. It can be an origin story, for instance.
And in that way, the release doesn't have to be tied together like you've experienced repeatedly over your career.
It doesn't have to be tied together, but it's best if it is, but it's best if it's planned to be done that way. It's not an afterthought. The licensing I've experienced is always an afterthought. It's like, you know, the movie's coming out in 4 months. Can you make a game? It's an afterthought. It's not like they gave me the script when they first greenlit it, you know, 2 years ago. I mean, making an animated movie like Shrek takes like 5 years. Right. So they could have started the game 5 years ago and had an incredible game. But no, they waited until, you know, 4 months before the movie came out to greenlight the game. It's like, they're asking the impossible, basically.
Right.
And that's why there were so many mediocre licensed games. People say, "Oh, licensed games," they don't necessarily suck. You know, they're limited by, you know, games are a product of really time and money. Basically, it's time this way and money this way. So the more money you spend and the more time you have, the better the game is. We did Robotech Battlecry. Robotech is a big fan, kind of like Transformers, but it's precedes
that game.
Transformers, right? So Robotech Battlecry, Mattel had it in development for 2.5 years. I bought it from Mattel. I put another 2.5 years into it. It got 5 magazine covers. It got Silver Cube Awards. It got 8.5 rating. I mean, that's really like, it's about the best you can expect from these critics. And and the fans loved it. And so, you know, I could see it. You know, it's like, if you only have this much time, even if you have this much money, you can't spend it all. So you can only spend this much of it in this much time, and it's not going to be a great game. So if the movie flops, you're not going to sell any games because it's not a great game. If the movie does really well, people are going to buy the game anyway.
Yeah.
Not necessarily today, because today you buy games digitally on Steam. You don't go into a store and buy them in a box, unless it's a special edition or something, you know. But at the end of the day, you know, the group I'm working with now, one of the guys said to me, you don't know how hard it is to find mature people that do what they say and say what they do in this business. And so you're the oldest guy in the team, Vince, but the youngest guy in the team is 45. Everybody else is between 50 and 60. And so, your age doesn't matter to us. Your experience is what matters to us. Your ability to figure out what's in the zeitgeist. And, they're horror specialists, these guys. And the guy that runs the film division, he's not necessarily a horror guy. He's just a producer of movies, which, not to take anything away from him, he produced Entourage, he produced The Last Ship, he produced You, he produced the movie that's out right now with Michael Keaton and is it Robert De Niro, or I can't remember. But he's done a lot of incredible stuff. He's represented by CAA. We had a call with them last week. They might represent us. But they have this library of horror IP, and horror passed $1 billion at the box office for the first time this year. And Blair Witch Project was made for like $50,000 or something, right?
Right, pennies, relatively speaking.
Even Halloween, I think he spent $3 million or $5 million. So you make these movies really inexpensively, and the profits are enormous. And so you could probably translate the same thing with games. Only the games have to be really good. You can't fool a fooler, so to speak. So the first game we're putting out is heavily reliant on game mechanics that are present in Majora's Mask. Have you ever played that game, Nintendo?
Zelda, yep.
That whole temporary, permanent, temporary state. So using that game mechanic to its fullest and even more so. And it lends itself that you can play the game in 72 minutes. And each minute accounts for an hour in real time. And some of the best-selling games on the market today, one of them is only 12 minutes long. People, you work 8 hours, you sleep 8 hours, and you have 8 hours to do what? Play games? No. If you're an adult, you'll probably play some games in that 8 hours, but not all of the 8 hours. And if you're 16, well, what if you play sports? What if you play in a band or whatever? You are not going to play 8 hours in a row unless you're living with mommy and you're unemployed and you're really a bum and that's all you do is play games all day. But 30,000 people, I think, have been laid off this year. 2024 has already had more video game industry layoffs than all of 2023, and it's only June.
Yep, that's true. That's unfortunately true. Yeah, I think it's been 30,000 over the last 2 years, but for sure, like the first 6 months of this year, I think was more than all of last year combined.
Yeah, the 2 years combined, 30,000, I think.
Yeah, 30,000. That's troubling.
And there are, I don't know if you know the company Embracer. You ever heard of them? I think they're out of Sweden or somewhere. And
somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, and so one of the guys is a billionaire, and he got a bunch of money, I think, from the Saudis, and they went and bought the rights to Lord of the Rings, and I forget what else, but they spent enormous amounts of money for these IPs. These IPs could be argued they're already spent. Lord of the Rings has been kind of, I'm not saying it can't be redone, but I don't know when. It's like, when can you reintroduce Harry Potter again? Maybe for the next generation, but I don't think reintroduce Harry Potter right away. So it is, and there's a whole ecosystem of gaming VCs, and we literally are meeting with all of them, and some of them understand transmedia and they get it, and some of them it's a new idea and they're going like, wow, never thought about that before. One guy asked us the other day, he said, so you want some money for this War Scrolls game, and we'll profit from the game and all the other products, right? we said yes. And he goes, what about if we invest in the top code that has the 42 IPs? How much would that take? And my CEO said $20 million. And they said, okay, why don't you send us over some more materials and we'll take a look and talk about it. And then the guy says to me, hey, Vince, how well do you know Tim Morton? Because he referred you. I said, I've known Tim for 30 years. He said, what are the circumstances behind that? I said, well, I gave Tim his first console game, which was He-Man Masters of the Universe on PlayStation and 2 and Xbox. And he goes, God, I love that He-Man franchise. He says, he goes, are you a good friend of Tim's, an acquaintance, or what? I said, we go to lunch once a month without fail. I said, we're good friends. And Tim is 60, I think. So, but Tim spent, 20 years Blizzard, so he didn't take a break and go do the cannabis business thing.
He stayed in. Yeah.
Yeah. And those guys, I went to Games Beat last year, I think. I saw a lot of guys my age that are still working, and it's because they kept working. And, they have friends.
That's the trick. As long as you don't have the break from the industry, then you can, keep the momentum.
Yeah. And when I called Tim and I told him that they said they didn't have relevant experience, he said, so it's horseshit. He goes, nothing has changed. Nothing. He goes, the only thing that's changed is the tools have gotten better, the computers have gotten faster, the machines have gotten better, more polygons and all this other. But as far as the process
hasn't changed.
The same. And the distribution is even better because it's downloaded. You don't have cost of goods like $3 or a box. You don't have to inventory 400,000 boxes in a warehouse somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's a bonus.
Right.
So yeah, the ageism thing, it's pretty amazing actually. I know a guy that I worked with at Crave. He was head of QA. He still can't get a job, and that was 2006 until now.
Wow.
And he's technical. He's everything. I mean,
yeah.
Any company would be lucky to have this guy.
Yeah, it just seems so counterintuitive, right? You would think that teams want the most experienced and most talented people on their teams as possible. Well, that comes with time. So naturally, like people who have more time, who are older, have more experience and that expertise.
Yeah, but the research says they want people they can hang out with. They want people they can relate to. They want people that are into the same shit. They want to go drinking with them. They want to play basketball with them. They want to do this. They want to do that. Whatever.
The social experience outside of work, basically.
Yeah. And you don't fit into that. You just don't fit into that mold, or they assume you don't. Put it that way.
Right.
I will never retire. I just won't. It's not in my DNA to retire.
And you and I said, had this conversation, I guess, earlier this week. I've been playing video games since I was 6. Been playing video games, 30 years. I because I'm older now, I have more responsibility, so I can't play for hours a day every day during the week. But there has not been a year in the last 30 years that I have not played video games. And my guess is if I have the opportunity, 30 years from now, I'll continue to play video games as much as possible, as much as my time would allow. So yeah, just like that, I would love to continue working in the industry the next 30 years. So it doesn't make any sense to me why, again, there's a commercial impact to ageism. It's reducing the ability for the market, the industry, to monetize the fastest growing demographic of consumers in the space.
Yeah,
I'm at a loss.
The guys that I'm working with now said to me, you can't get an interview with that resume? It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. I hope that it gets better. Thank you for speaking about it. As you know, I had my first book. I'm trying to hopefully start my next book next year. I would be honored if you would work with me to put together a editorial section in it to discuss this in more detail. Hopefully we can work with some folks like AARP or whoever.
I am a prolific writer, like creative writing, and I've been writing a science fiction book for 2 years, and I started to put it through AI to clean it up. Basically, like I put a chapter through AI and say, polish this for me. And half the time it makes it better, half the time it butchers it. It's pretty funny. But I've been working on this book for a long time, and 2 years isn't that long. But I don't have that much spare time, you know.
Yeah.
I'm actually
okay.
You know, but yeah, I would love to do more of this. You know, talk to you more about stuff, because a lot of stuff to talk about for sure.
You have a lot more stories that you know there's waiting to be told. I know you had talked about Shrek and more about that experience. So again, we're going to bring you back on the podcast. We definitely have to have a follow-up on the cannabis conversation. It's getting late here on the East Coast, and still got a few things to get done between here and the time my brain shuts off. But thank you, Vincent, so much for your time. Thank you, everybody who joined us for this conversation. If you want an introduction to Vincent and he's on board, I'm happy to make any intros. Vincent, please let me know how I can help you with anything you're working on, you know, into the future.
Yeah, and you do the same, like we talked about.
Yeah. Well, before we go, please let everybody know where they can support you, support you know, the good shepherds, the Shepherd Studio.
The Shepherd Studios.
Shepherd Studio. I'm going to bring it back on screen here just briefly so we can see it before we go. But yeah, the Shepherd Studio, new IP, transmedia IP. You're thinking 360 degrees of the value in an IP, and very few studios in the industry do that very well. You know, Minecraft might be one of the few exceptions to the rule,
but
it's few and far between.
Yep, there are a few exceptions. You're right.
Yeah, and you're going to be one of them. So we wish you continued success in your career with the studio and your team. Again, before we leave, where can people find you, follow your updates, follow the team's updates, with, you know, excluding the website, which is you know, Shepherd Studios. If you go online, you can find them.
They can find me there at the Shepherd Studios. They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on even Facebook.
Okay.
And Instagram. I don't have big accounts on any of those except maybe Facebook and LinkedIn. I have a lot of followers, or friends. And that's about it. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Yeah, X is just too polarizing for me. Reddit is even more polarizing for me. Reddit is traumatic.
That's true. Both of those are true. So Vincent, thanks for your time. Everybody, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next Thursday. Peace.
Yeah. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank